Good afternoon, welcome to my channel. I'm back with another little discursive piece on a topic that some of you may find controversial. We'll see. Basically the theme of this talk is the problem with short stories. And I think I'm a bit of an expert on the subject because I've written a whole bunch of them, which you can find in this book, Running Coyote and Fallen Star, available from all good Amazons. And hopefully soon, I should actually get around to putting on Ingram Spark so that there's a vague chance that some copies might end up in bookshops. I must get around to that. Anyway, yeah, there's 48 short stories in there, 16 of which were published in various literary magazines. And I've probably written about 130 short stories since March of 2020, since lockdown first happened, and I started this whole crazy project. But I just wanted to talk to you about the concept of writing short stories and what the problem with short stories is. Because I have a slightly, I suppose, love-hate relationship with the form. I kind of love writing it, but I hate the fact that nobody reads it. Nobody reads short stories. Nobody likes short stories. This is my premise for this talk. And I hear you all protesting already, but there's thousands of literary magazines. There's dozens of volumes of short stories published every year. There's a collection by J.K. Rowling coming out next week or something. Well, let's look at the facts. Let's look at the figures. Bookseller in 2018 reported a surge of 50% of sales of short story collections, which was kind of amazing, until you find out that the two biggest selling short story collections were by Tom Hanks, an actor you may have heard of, and Jojo Moyes, a writer you may have heard of. In fact, those two books accounted for 22% of the entire volume of short story collections sold in 2018. Nielsen, who collates statistics on book sales, reported in that year that there were 692,087 units sold. That seems a lot, that's 2/3 of a million books. But then when you look at the sale of novels in the US alone in 2018, and you think that we're in an age, when literacy is declining, people are reading less, still 675 million books. So we're talking here less than 1 million copies of short story collections and 675 million books. That percentage is utterly tiny. It's what, 0.1%. Can that be right? Have I got these figures right? That's what I found out online. But even if it's 6.75 million, and I've got this wrong and I've forgotten a decimal point, which is possible, that would still mean that short story collections were accounting for only 10%. I'll do a little fact check and I will put the real truth above my head now. Okay, so there you can see there's a pretty small number of books. Literary magazines, yes, there are thousands of them. Guess who reads them? Other writers of short stories. and to be honest, and it's going to sound really bad, I have about 7 or 8 up there that my stories have been published in. I've read 2 or 3 other stories from those collections. I haven't even read those collections from beginning to end myself. And yes, I feel a little bit guilty for that, but I've got stacks of books I'm not reading. So if I'm not reading them, and I'm one of the people who writes them, and presumably one of the key audiences for them, who the hell's reading them? Now the fact is, a lot of literary magazines are funded by universities, by local arts funds, and public funding, and that's fine, and we love that. We love the fact that these things are still being published. But your average punter is not looking for short story collections, especially short story collections by unknown writers, and this is the key thing. If you are already a successful author of novels, or possibly even non-fiction, I suspect maybe Bill Bryson, if he took it upon himself to write a collection of short stories, would sell a shed load because he's Bill Bryson. But if you're an unknown author bringing a collection of short stories out, I mean, you might as well write haikus on a balloon and send it up into the sky. The reason I did this, you're thinking, "God, but he's done it. Why has he done it? Crazy bastard." Sorry, excuse my language. Well, I did it because I wanted to get the work out in the world, even if only a few people read it. There's no point in it sitting around on my hard drive or, stacks of paper were I to be crazy enough to print it out. And if I ever do sell a novel or sell more copies of my non-fiction, people may want to read this book. But they won't want to read this book because I'm an unknown author at the moment, comparatively unknown. So this is the thing I'm dealing with at the moment. I'm writing all these stories, I'm sending them out there. A few of you are watching them, not as many as I'd like. It'd be nice if every story got to double figures, to be honest. But even if that never happens, it's helping me to... This is the pros. I'm going to get onto the pros because I don't want to send this whole speech to be too down. The reason I do it is because it makes me a better writer. 3 main reasons for that. I gain experience. It's like a pilot gaining flight time, flight hours. If you don't fly a plane enough, you're not going to learn how to fly a plane. And yes, you can write novels, but that's a whole different beast. It's not as easy to finish and polish a novel and make a satisfying completed piece out of it and send it out into the world. You can do that with short stories. You get feedback. It's easy to persuade someone to read your short story, a friend, editor of a literary magazine, and you'll get feedback. They'll either publish it, or they'll say, "We nearly liked it, but could you make these changes?" Or they'll say, "We didn't quite like it enough, but please send us something else." You find out if people like your work. With sending novels out, you will never hear anything back from 90% of the people you submit to. You'll never hear anything. They may have died. Your email may never have even got to its intended inbox. You'll never know, because they receive such a volume. They don't have enough time to even reply. Not even a standard... You maybe get an acknowledgement of receipt, but you'll never get anything saying thanks but no thanks. It's just not the done thing anymore to do that. You can test ideas. It's like a little laboratory. There are so many different ideas in this book. Weird science fiction concepts, strange fantasy things, formal experiments, there's a story there that's like 100 words long. I've got a story published coming out soon, June I think it is. A magazine has accepted a story I wrote, which it's called Alphabet Soup. You'll find it earlier on this channel, where every word begins with a subsequent letter of the alphabet. It took me ages to write that thing, and that is a crazy experimental thing that I would almost never have any chance of getting published in a novel, even as a crazy chapter in a novel. So it's a laboratory for testing ideas, and it's just easier. I know, okay, it's hard to write a perfect piece of anything, but you can write and hone a perfectly decent, as far as you're able to do, 1,000-word short story in a few days. If you set your mind to it, you can. And it's just, as I say, it's experience. It keeps you coming up with new concepts and new ideas. Some of those ideas may be worth expanding. That's another point. You may find that you've sort of road tested an idea and thought, there's more to it than that. I want to follow these characters and see what happens to them, or I want to see what else is happening in this world that I've built. You might want to follow a science fiction concept through to its next logical conclusion, see where it takes you. And also, there are literary competitions that I believe, I haven't really investigated them, but I believe you can advance your career by winning a literary prize in a competition. If it's a high enough prestige thing, judged by authors that you recognize, editors that are editors of significant publications or newspapers, that can advance your career. I've not so far found that having now nearly 30 credits on my writing CV has helped at all to find an agent. They don't care. They're not interested. Not interested in short stories. Not even remotely interested. Do not send them your short stories. So anyway, I know it's going to sound a bit of a downer, but I do believe in the art form of the short story. But in the same way that a poet believes in the art form of poetry, knowing that 95% of people are never going to read their poems or even buy or read any volume of poetry. Once you accept that you're writing in a very niche format, you can achieve great things. You can self-publish. This cost me literally nothing to publish. I might do an additional on how I got this published and what went into it, but literally this cost me nothing, not a penny to publish, apart from my time, which of course I never price as I should, but who's going to pay me for that? Nobody. So you can self-publish, but don't expect fame and fortune to come from having written even the most amazing collection of short stories. There are a few possible tiny exceptions. I can't think of any, but maybe you can, of an author whose debut work was short stories. Technically James Joyce, I suppose, Dubliners. Was that his first piece? Might have been. He might be one of the few exceptions to the rule, but that was over 100 years ago, let's be honest. But do it anyway, because you're going to learn, you're going to get better, you'll come up with great ideas, you'll discover characters that you want to explore and other things. You're not committing vast amounts of time to a project that may never see the light of day. Okay, well, there's one thing we haven't really looked at. I mean, I've said that people don't like short stories, but why don't they like short stories? Or why do they think they don't like short stories? I think it might be they expect, if they're going to invest their time in reading, that they will fall in love with a character, be fascinated by a character, and then they'll want to follow them on a journey. They don't want that journey to stop after a few pages. They don't know how to deal with that. That's like it's not the same as songs, because people do like to listen to very short songs and then move on to something else. But for some reason, when it comes to reading, people want to invest time into it. Short stories are good for picking up on the tube or reading before going to bed. They're ideal for that, but most people don't even really think about that as a thing they'd want to do. There are some exceptions. I mean, there's some short story collections where the short stories are about 90 pages long, so they're novellas really. Even in audio format, nobody's interested in short stories really. There's a few, maybe there's a couple of podcasts where somebody's created, but then it's more like a radio show because they've usually got music and sound effects and stuff. I was on one podcast where I read my story and then I was interviewed about it, but that's pretty unusual. That was an American thing. I think it's called the Ice Factor. No, forgotten. Maybe I'll put it above. Anyway, this might sound like a bit of a downer, but I'm not trying to discourage anyone from writing short stories. Do it, but don't expect your short story collection to change your life. It's very unlikely to do so. And if you can't even persuade your friends and family to listen to your short stories, who the hell else is gonna? But that doesn't mean you shouldn't still write them, because every single story, every single narrative you write will advance your abilities one step further. And having written 130 stories with probably about 400 characters in them, I feel I'm definitely got a lot better as a writer of fiction. So there you go. That's my thoughts, controversial or not, on short stories and why nobody likes them. You may make a comment. I'd love it if you did. Tell me I'm an idiot. Tell me like you've read fantastic. You've got a whole collection of short stories by different authors that nobody's ever heard of. And share this video if you think it's important or interesting. Like it and subscribe. Do all those things. Why not? What does it cost you? And if you really want to, buy this book. You might enjoy it.